Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Edgard. If you're looking for something that will make your heart race and a chill run down your spine, then you've come to the right place. Get ready for 3 creepy stories that will leave you in fear. So, sit back, get comfortable, and let the darkness consume you. The first time I noticed something was off, it was subtle. A faint chill lingered in the air, sharper than the season warranted. It was the kind of cold that clung to the skin, impossible to shake. I didn't think much of it at first. Winter was settling in, and I blamed the drafty old windows in my apartment. Then came the footsteps, faint but deliberate. They echoed behind me as I walked home late one night. I glanced over my shoulder and saw nothing, just empty sidewalks, washed in the amber glow of streetlights. A rational part of me dismissed it. The city was noisy. Sounds traveled. Maybe it was just someone walking the opposite direction a block over, their steps distorted by the alleys and tall buildings. But it happened again and again. It was on the third night that I began to feel the weight of it. The sound wasn't consistent, but it was there, always far enough to seem distant, but never absent. By the time I reached my apartment door, my chest was tight with unease. As I fumbled with my keys, I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. The sensation crawled over me, prickling the back of my neck. When I finally stepped inside, I bolted the door and checked every lock twice. I even slid a chair under the doorknob, though I laughed at myself for the gesture. Paranoia, I thought. Just paranoia. But that night, as I lay in bed, something woke me. A noise. Not loud, but deliberate. It was the soft creak of a floorboard. My heart pounded as I stared into the darkness of my room. The sound came again, closer this time, as if someone were shifting their weight just out of sight. I held my breath, straining to hear over the rush of blood in my ears, but the silence that followed was absolute. The next morning I convinced myself it had been a dream. I went about my day, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. At work, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, scanning faces in the crowd, searching for something or someone out of place. But no one stood out. Everyone seemed normal, ordinary. That evening, I decided to test myself, to prove that I was imagining things. I took a longer route home, weaving through unfamiliar streets. I stopped abruptly in the middle of the sidewalk, pretending to check my phone, and listened. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faint but undeniable, I heard it. Footsteps. They stopped when I did. Spun around, my heart hammering, but the street behind me was empty. The lights of passing cars flickered against brick walls and shop windows, but there was no one there, no one I could see. When I reached my building, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys. I hurried inside and locked the door, pressing my back against it. My apartment felt different. Smaller, darker. The shadows seemed deeper. The corners more oppressive. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the pipes sent my nerves into overdrive. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, clutching a kitchen knife, waiting for I wasn't sure what. Days turned into weeks. The presence, whatever it was, didn't leave. It stayed with me, hovering just out of reach, just out of sight. The footsteps became a constant companion. Sometimes they followed me home. Other times they seemed to come from within my apartment. I would find things out of place, a book moved from the shelf, a glass I hadn't used sitting on the counter. I started to question my sanity. Was I losing my mind? But no matter how much I doubted myself, the feeling of being watched never wavered. It was always there, a silent pressure, a weight I couldn't escape. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood in the middle of my living room, heart racing, and shouted, "Who's there? What do you want?" My voice echoed off the walls, but there was no answer, just silence. And then, as if in response, the faintest sound reached my ears. It wasn't a voice or a knock. It was breathing. Slow, steady, and impossibly close. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming to run, but I couldn't move. The sound didn't stop, it lingered, filling the air around me. I turned slowly, my eyes darting across the room, but there was nothing there, just empty space. Yet I knew I wasn't alone. My big brother had been missing for a year. It all started when he went out of town for a job interview. He kept in touch through our family chat room on his way there, right up until he sat in the company's waiting room. "If they're calling my name, wish me luck." That was his last message. Nothing has been heard from him since. We called his number, it rang, but no one answered. We checked his social media, but there were no updates for a year. My brother Eric vanished into thin air. A job interview out of town didn't sound alarming. None of us, Mom, Dad, or I, bothered to ask which town or company he was heading to. We'll ask when he gets the job, we thought. It took me a year to gather the courage to go through his belongings. That's when I finally pieced together his destination, Callisto, a small town 2 hours west of our parents' house. Callisto was tiny compared to our city. After a year, the odds of finding a trace of him were slim, but I just couldn't let it go. I had to try. So I went to Callisto. The town was quaint, with barely a skyscraper in sight. As I drove around, I tried to imagine what company a civil engineering graduate like my brother might have been interviewing with. There were a few likely places, but it wasn't as if I could just walk in and ask if they remembered him. It had been a year. While driving aimlessly, I passed a zoo. It was surprisingly large for a town of this size. Then I noticed the name engraved on its curved gate. Empty Zoo. Weird, I thought. Who names a zoo empty? Something clicked in my memory. I remembered I saw something when I looked through all Eric's work stuff. I pulled out a folder where my brother kept all his documents related to the companies he'd had interviews with. There was a piece of paper the size of a business card. One word was written in large, all-capital letters on one side. Empty. I flipped the paper to check the other side. Blank. Empty. Weird. Asterisk. Did Eric have an interview at a zoo called Empty? Curiosity got the better of me and I parked the car. The ticketing booth was deserted and the gate was unlocked. I wasn't trying to trespass, but something about this place called to me. The zoo was eerie. Every cage I saw housed only one kind of animal, monkeys. Dozens of them, but no other species. What kind of zoo has only monkeys? I muttered under my breath. The monkeys noticed me and became agitated. They reached out, waving their hands inward as if pleading for help. Weird and creepy. Then I passed one cage and a particular monkey caught my attention. Unlike the others, this one monkey appeared to be more hysterical than the rest. It reached its hand out of the cage, but I noticed something odd. Instead of waving in like the others, this one monkey's hand was waving out, as if urging me to leave. That's when I saw it. It felt completely inappropriate, but for some reason, I felt like there was a similarity between that monkey and my lost brother Eric. I took a closer look. The monkey had something that looked like a birthmark on its left cheek, brown, butterfly-shaped. It was huge, almost covering its entire left cheek. Weirdly enough, my brother had exactly the same birthmark. Brown, butterfly-shaped, covering his left cheek. I froze. The monkey grew more frantic. Its hand kept waving outward, even more vigorously than before. I backed away, my heart pounding. The creepy and eerie feeling was strong, so I immediately turned around and bolted out of the zoo. It was already dark, so I had to find a hotel to stay for the night. That night, I wrote about my experience on my personal blog. Within an hour, when I checked it back, there were 56 comments. Never in my life had I gotten 56 comments on my blog in an hour. Every single comment shared the same story. They had their family, wives, husbands, friends, colleagues, whatever, leave town to attend a job interview, and then went missing. 32 of them were trying to look for their missing relatives, visiting the said town, all in 32 different towns, and happened to encounter a zoo with the same name, Empty. A zoo with the same weird name displaying only monkeys, and there are monkeys that for some reason somehow appear to resemble their missing relatives. It's truly horrifying. I couldn't get ahead of it, so I was thinking of returning to the zoo just a few hours later to investigate further. I had a strong urge to find my missing brother. So I walked out of my hotel room, and in the dead of night, I drove back to the zoo. It was located not too far from the hotel where I stayed, just a few blocks away. In the distance, I could see a long, high wall with a glimpse of a curved gate. It was dark, so I couldn't see clearly, but I was sure it was the gate with the words "Empty Zoo" engraved on it. Kept driving until I passed the gate and peeked inside to see if anyone was guarding it. It was a zoo. There should be a security guard or something. If he didn't let me pass, I should at least ask him something about the zoo. I looked through the gate into the area where the zoo should be. It was empty. No zoo. Nothing. I shifted my gaze to the curved gate where "Empty Zoo" should have been. Blank. No text. Nothing. What the hell? I parked my car abruptly and got out. As I got closer to the gate, I saw someone standing right behind it. He appeared to be smoking. "Excuse me, sir," I called out to him. "Yeah, what can I help you with?" he responded. He looked like a security guard. "The zoo, where's the zoo?" I asked. His brows furrowed. "What zoo?" "A zoo. I was here this afternoon, just a few hours ago. No one was guarding the ticketing booth and the gate was open, so I took a walk inside. There were only monkeys in it, no other animals," I explained. The security guard looked stunned. "Sir, there was no zoo here, never was," he said. I was about to complain, but something came to mind. Maybe I took a wrong turn. "Oh, my bad. Where's the zoo then?" "Maybe I took a wrong turn," I said. "No zoo, sir. This town just celebrated its 42nd birthday last week, and we've never had a zoo in 42 years. "No way," I shouted in shock. "But I was here just a few hours ago." "What time was it, if I may ask?" 4 p.m. "Sir, I work a double shift today. I've been here since 2 p.m. I didn't see anyone entering. Not you. Not anyone." The security guard looked concerned. "I'm not sure if I should tell you this, sir," he said slowly and carefully, "but you're not the first one to ask about a zoo." "No?" "No, sir. I've been working here for 4 years. We've never had a zoo here. But over those 4 years, countless people have come here asking me about a zoo. When they ask about it, it's always their second time coming. The first time was hours earlier, and they trespassed the gate because no one was guarding it. They claimed that there was a zoo here, with only monkeys in it." "Just like me," I said. "Yes, sir, just like you." I froze. My blood ran cold. "I don't know what happened here, sir. It's strange and creepy for me, too, having experienced countless people coming, asking for exactly the same thing that was never here." The security guard paused for a while, seeming uncertain. "This place belonged to a billionaire entrepreneur. He tried selling or renting this place for years. I was a security guard and he didn't talk business with me, so I heard this weird thing from someone else." "Heard what?" "That he actually rented this place to a zoo. And it has been 8 years now, but I repeat, never saw any zoo here." I shivered. Then something suddenly popped into my head. "Does he own another location this huge in another town?" I asked. "I mean, he's a billionaire entrepreneur." The security guard seemed to hesitate. "As far as I'm concerned, sir, yes. He owns other locations just as huge in other towns. I don't know how many of them really, but we guards talk to each other." He paused, seeming somehow terrified. "Guess what he rented those locations to?" "A zoo?" I took a guess. "Yes, sir," he replied. "A zoo. All of them. He rented the locations to a zoo, the same zoo company on paper." "What do you mean on paper?" I frowned. The guard glanced around nervously before leaning in. "On paper, they were all rented to a zoo. In reality," the security guard turned his head around to look toward the empty lot inside the gate. "They were all just like this. Empty." My dad said we never had an attic, but I knew he was lying. "It all started in 2012, following my 5-year-old brother's death. Grief made itself at home in the deep wound left by the loss of our mother only 3 years earlier. I was only 9 years old, too young to endure such agony. Then again, I don't know whether anybody would be able to bear what I've seen and felt. After Eric passed, it was just Dad and me. But I felt, in a way, as if I'd buried Dad too, or at least buried the version of him I had once known. Eric's funeral seemed to break him. In fairness, my father always been inward and reclusive, but he became worse after my brother died. Some nights he'd leave my dinner on the table, then I wouldn't see him until the morning. "I miss Eric," I tearfully confessed one evening. And Dad simply replied, "We need to move on, Lorna." Maybe that would have been easier if I hadn't felt so isolated. Knowing what I know now, however, I wonder whether I should be thankful. I was a meek child, and trauma has left me a meeker adult. The meek go unnoticed, and that may well have saved me. At some point in late 2012, I spent the weekend with my grandparents, and when I returned, I immediately noticed quite a pronounced difference in the house. "Where is it?" I asked as I lugged my suitcase across the upstairs landing. "Where's what?" my dad asked in a flat tone. I nodded my head at the white plaster on the ceiling above. "The attic door." He frowned. "We don't have an attic, Lorna." I rolled my eyes. "Very funny, Dad. What's between the ceiling and the roof, then?" "That space is structural," my father said softly. "It's not accessible." That made no sense to me, but I was young, too young to question my parents' supposed wisdom. Of course, I knew the attic door had existed, but I assumed that Dad had been playing a practical joke. That filled me hope that for the first time in many months, his sense of humor may have returned. Still, as the years went by and the attic door remained only in my assured memory, I began to feel quite uneasy. I hated walking underneath that ceiling and seeing only white rather than the wooden door which had once been there. Maybe I would have eventually got over it, would have come to believe that I'd simply misremembered my childhood, if it hadn't been for my dad's conviction that I'd lost my mind. A strange, abrasive conviction. He always seemed to be on the verge of losing his patience. Still, Dad promised that there was nothing but foam, wood, and wiring chases into space between the second floor ceiling and the property's sloping roof above. No space for a proper attic, according to him. Anyhow, by the time I entered my teenage years, I'd stopped asking about the loft space from my childhood. Stopped caring, truth be told. I became buried in school, then college, then university. All the while, I drifted farther and farther away from Dad. And that came down to more than the ceiling. Our relationship has only become more strained as the years have gone by, and the same is true of every relationship my father forms. He broke up with Jenna just before Christmas, which turned him cold and standoffish. I've never liked him in that state, and admittedly I miss Jenna. She'd been somewhat of a warm, comforting presence in the house for the past 4 years. In spite of this, the first alarm bell only started ringing this morning. Around 3 in the morning, to be exact. A few hours before I needed to get up for work, I was woken by a series of noises. They came from above, 3 weighty, board-buckling creaks. It wasn't the sound of the ceiling settling, wasn't the sound of rats burrowing through those supposed wiring chases in the inaccessible loft space. Rather, it was sound that confirmed what I'd always known. Something was moving around above me, in the very real attic. But I didn't call out, didn't investigate. Instead, I clung to the edge of my sweaty duvet and lay silently, swallowing the shriek that wanted to escape. I've mastered the art of burying fear. Part of me knew that to call out would be a very, very unwise idea. The part of me that has been suppressing things since I was old enough to remember them, the things that happened even whilst Eric and Mum were alive. I remember the set of eyeballs that would watch me from the crack in my ajar bedroom door. Sometimes I'd wake during the night and see them disappear into the black. I remember the time Dad stood and watched as I, barely more than a toddler, flailed helplessly in a swimming pool. I'm sure I've forgotten worse things. But I'll never forget what I saw this morning. This morning, something possessed me, some new source of courage, or more likely, delirium. My dad went to work, and I had time before my shift, so I went into the garage, fetched a sizable hammer, and returned to the upstairs landing. I took to the ceiling with a series of swings, tearing a hole through the white plaster with alarming ease. At first, I thought I'd underestimated my own strength, but then I realized there had been next to nothing in the form of resistance from the ceiling. Nothing to prevent my remodeling project. I spat plaster and dust from my wide mouth, then I eyeballed the black abyss above me. I knew it. I'd known it for 13 years. The space above the second floor wasn't filled with piles of foam and wooden beams and wires. It was a black, empty void. There was, and always had been, room up there. There had always been an attic. Part of me wants to end here, but I'm currently sitting in a police station, trying to keep my mind off everything, so I'm going to tell you what I told them. I set up a ladder on the landing, climbed into the attic, then lit the space with my phone torch. No, I don't know how the loft space used to look. After all, I hardly had reason to go up there as a 9-year-old. However, whatever purpose it once served, it serves a new one now. I hurled my guts across the floorboards when my light caught the first of the bodies. A woman was bundled up in a large, translucent plastic bag, a maggot-filled bag. The remaining flesh of her bloody face was peeling away to reveal a wide-mouthed skull, but enough features remained to identify her. It was Jenna. As I moved the torch beam, I nearly lost my footing on the ladder. I wasn't horrified by the sight of Jenna, not even by the sight of the many other plastic-wrapped corpses, some little more than ashes and tattered clothes. I wobbled in fear when I saw the shrine, for lack of a better word, near the back of the attic. Surrounded by fresh, burning candles were two long, rectangular wooden crates with what seemed to be sturdy lids and brass clasps. These were no crates, I know that. About half an hour ago, an officer informed me that my father hadn't returned home. They haven't found him. Sooner or later I have to leave this place, but I don't want to do that. I'm terrified. I should feel safe, apparently. The police officers have promised to get me far away from here. They've promised to watch me, to protect me. They promised not to let me out of their sight. How on earth will they keep that promise? Nobody's ever stopped my father from making things disappear before.